This is Sustainable Voices, where ideas for a better future speak loud. Hello and welcome to another episode. I'm Luisa, one of your hosts, and today I'm joined by my co-host Amelie. Hello, Amelie.
Hi, Luisa. Hi, everyone listening. We're so glad you're here. Today, we are talking about environmental stress, specifically about how it affects our well-being while cycling and the barriers that hinder us from using the bicycle as means of transport and what we can do about it.
That's right. But for this discussion, we are not gonna be alone. We have invited a very interesting person to join our podcast. His name is David Agula, and he is working as a scientific mobility researcher. He was in charge of a project focusing on arising stress while cycling, which is called ESSEM. He will tell us more about it later and join us to give us some insights.
That's going to be very interesting, but maybe let us give a little introduction on the topic, starting with why cycling generally is such a great option for students like us and what our overarching motivation is to talk about stress and its impact on well-being while cycling. So, talking about all the good benefits while cycling, first of all, it has significant health benefits.
And let us not forget about the low costs, which is especially for a student a super relevant factor.
Oh, yeah, that's true. And also, let us talk about the positive impact on the environment. Cycling reduces greenhouse gas emissions, noise, air pollution, and traffic congestion. It's a sustainable way to travel and aligns perfectly with the transition to energy efficient, low carbon mobility systems in cities. So it all sounds so wonderful, but it would be too perfect if there wasn't an issue, right?
Yeah, that's true. Despite that long list of advantages of cycling regarding our health and the environmental benefits, I remember that you once mentioned that only few students of our university decide to hop on the saddle.
I have noticed that according to a continuous survey from 2021 to 2024, 72% of students of Aalen University never use the bike to get to university. And it's not just the students at Aalen University here. According to the 2023 cycling monitor reported by the BMDW, only 39% of people aged between 14 and 69 in Germany regularly use a bicycle. So I've often wondered, how can this be and what is the reason for it?
I think the interesting thing here is that perceived stress, which can occur by the perceived lack of safety and comfort, is, among other things, identified as a major barrier when it comes to using the bike. Even though cycling positively affects your mental health, it can also increase your stress levels. So there must be a certain stressors we face along the ride.
Yeah, a short while ago, this is honestly something that I've never really considered before. When I think about my childhood, cycling along with my friends was such a fun thing to do. But when you're a participant on the road, it seems to be very different. So you mentioned stress seems to play a major role, right?
That is correct. I think it's important to start by talking about what stress actually is. I mean, all of us experience stress at some point, but do we really know what is happening to our body and mind?
Yeah, great point. It's such a universal experience, yet we often don't stop to think about what's really going on.
Exactly. So let's dive into the concept of stress for a moment. One definition describes it as a non-specific mix of psychological and physiological responses of our body. Essentially, it's our organism adapting to survive, avoid discomfort, or process what's happening around us.
So it's like our body's way of saying, hey, something's up, better do something about it, right?
Yes, exactly. The psychological side of this can be explained by the transactional stress model from Lazarus, way back in 1984. It's been hugely influential in stress research over the years.
Oh, yeah, I've heard about that model. It's all about how we're consistently assessing what's happening around us, right?
That's right. That's called appraisal. First, there's a primary appraisal where we evaluate a situation, what Lazarus calls a stressor or stimuli, as positive, neutral, or a threat. If we see it as a threat to our well-being, we move to the secondary appraisal. That's where we ask ourselves, what can I do about this? Do I have the resources to cope?
And if the answer is not really, that's when we feel stressed.
Exactly. It's where just a situation becomes a stressful situation, and that's where the body takes over. Afterwards, we evaluate how to react to the stressor, which is called coping. But this is too much details for this episode.
And that brings us to cycling. Just like in life, cycling comes with its own stressors. Things like rough road surfaces, noisy environments, or dangerous situations.
Yes, and the stresses can lead to a stress reaction, which might make people avoid cycling altogether.
Additionally to that, a survey from 2021 describes that the top three stressors for cyclists are motor vehicles, pavement, and poor infrastructure. These things can make the experience of cycling quite unpleasant, especially on busy roads with all the cars and noises around you. How should someone be able to stay calm there?
It is elementary for tackling climate change. That shows we need more research and also a more practical solution-focused perspective on how to face these issues. And one project exactly working on that topic is called the ESSEM project. Now it is time to introduce our guest for today's episode. Hello, David. Thank you so much for being here today. How are you doing?
Fine, fine. Thank you for having me.
We're so glad to have you here and that you share some insights about you and your work. Maybe let us start by introducing you to our listeners. We already mentioned that you are a scientific researcher at the Institute of Human Factors and Technology Management, IAT, and that you're focusing on sustainable mobility. Could you tell us a little bit more about you and your work?
Yes, of course. Yeah. So I'm David. I am working at the Institute since around about 1.5 years in the team Mobility Ecosystems. And there in this team, we do pretty much empirical work. So we not only look at the technical solutions for mobility or mobility transition, but also we want to look at the human side of that. And in this regard, we are doing empirical work. So we're doing surveys, qualitative research, quantitative research on mobility behavior, on the acceptance of new mobility solutions, sustainable mobility solutions. And that's basically what we are doing in the team in many different projects.
Nice, wonderful. What exactly inspires you to explore more about sustainable mobility? Do you have any personal connections or motivations related to this topic?
Yeah, in general, I think when looking at sustainable mobility, it's always about the acceptance of sustainable mobility. So, as I already mentioned previously, you always have to know quite well what people want, what their mobility needs are, and that you can orient or align the mobility solutions with those needs. And this is what really sparked my interest when I started working here and what motivates me as well. We really want to give insights to project partners, for example, on what the user needs really are, and that we can also give some recommendations to improve maybe some products or mobility services or mobility innovations that with the final goal to increase the acceptance of those mobility solutions from my personal perspective. For example, when I think of it, I grew up in a rather suburban area, but now I live in Stuttgart, I work in Stuttgart, and also there you always see this divide in user needs and mobility needs. You cannot always impose one solution to everybody and all groups, but you always need to be very specific and need to know where your target group is and how you can address your target group. And that's what's really interesting.
Thank you. It is very logical that people in different circumstances in rural areas or in the city have different needs. So the last project, as I understand, was with biking and with cycling mobility. Can you tell us a little bit about the ESSEM project?
Yes, the ESSEM project stands for Emotion Sensing for E-Bicycle Safety and Mobility Comfort, which is quite a long sentence, but sums it up quite well. So we, in this project, want to find a way how we can measure emotions, and in our case, like a negative emotion like stress, not only via empirical approaches, for example, surveys, but also by using technology. We have wearables that capture different vital data, and based on this data, we can identify situations in which people felt stressed. Stress is a quite complex construct. It's not that easy to measure, but in general, we try to capture emotions such as stress or negative arousal based on different methods while cycling. So the use case is cycling in cities. That is the use case we tested this in.
Okay, wow, that sounds very interesting. So you mentioned that you're testing or you try to measure stress in cities, for example. So what is the overall concept behind this project?
Yeah. So we have a framework that is twofold, I would say. We have two general streams. We have one stream that is more on the infrastructural side, I would say, and then we have the product side or the project stream. In this stream that is related to infrastructure and cities, and we really want to identify hotspots in cities where people felt stressed. Our example always, or the main use case of the ESSEM project, is the city of Osnabrück. And there we had people that participated in our studies and that were wearing those wearables during their normal everyday cycling routes or travel. And on this basis, we develop an algorithm in the project that is able to identify those stress moments that we already talked about. And the aim there is that we can give recommendations to cities on how to improve infrastructure for cyclists. So for example, if we see some stress hotspot in a city, we see it's maybe like a very narrow bicycle lane, we can find the evidence and give recommendations to the city and say, hey, look, this bicycle lane is maybe a little bit too narrow. You could think of making it a little bit more broad. And this is one project stream, I would say, in the project ESSEM. So really giving infrastructure planners the insight to improve cycling infrastructure. And then the other stream is more the product side, I would say. Here we also want to help developing products that are fostering security or safety. For example, safety products. We had a study that we conducted here at the Mobility Innovation Lab at the Fraunhofer IAO, where we tested how safety products for cyclists influence the safety perception. And then also our partner Autoactive tries to include stress measurements into routing solutions. An idea could be that we develop some alternative route for people that do not want to experience those stress hotspots, and we can offer like an alternative route for them based on the data we collected. So these are the two streams that we have in the project that we follow.
So the stress hotspot map is like Google Maps, but it says where to avoid specific locations so you don't experience that much stress.
Exactly.
Okay.
So when we, as I gave the example of a narrow cycling lane, it could also be very big crossings, for example, where you don't have a very good overview over the traffic situation. And all of these hotspots we could go around.
You mentioned measuring stress. Do you want to give us more details about that?
Yeah, in general, stress is a quite complex construct. And I think you can see or you can look at stress from different viewpoints. You have more long-term stress, I would say, and you know that maybe you have a stressful period in your life, exams are waiting, and you're in general feeling stressed. And then there is more the situational stress that is a result of an immediate stimulus, and you really feel stressed in a specific situation at a specific point of time. So when we talk about cycling, this could be a situation where you nearly had an accident, for example, or where there was a conflict with another traffic participant. So we look at this very situational dimension of stress, but we always have to underline that we call it stress, but I already said it's quite difficult to capture stress and measure stress. So it's more maybe precise to say it's negative arousal. It's some kind of negative reaction of your body, of your nervous system to some stimulus. And we can frame this as stress, or we can interpret this as stress. And how we can measure that is, I already mentioned that we have those wearables where we capture different vital parameters. And you maybe know this when you're feeling fear or stress, you have a bit like you have cold hands, a little bit sweaty. And this is exactly what this algorithm that we developed in the project does. So we can really see very small variations in skin conductivity and skin temperature. And when you think of having this fear situation, we see that skin temperature decreases a little bit and the skin conductivity increases. And this is the point where we can say there was this negative arousal. And then this point in time, we can connect with geo data, and then we can really see on a map where this person experienced this negative arousal.
Okay. Yeah, that's very fancy and super precise because like you don't have any bias with the subjective feeling about stress. Like you can really see where the negative arousal increases and where not.
And based on the data, have you already seen some changes made in infrastructure that were based on the data you collected?
Yes, so we have some initial insights. For example, in Osnabrück, there were different measures that were undertaken. And for example, we had a situation where a street was blocked for car traffic and was like only cyclists were allowed to ride on this street. And we could see also in the data that this really changed the experience on this street. So we had previously we had a hotspot or a stress hotspot there. And then after the implementation of this new street or cyclist street, we could see that this hotspot was not so intense anymore. So, of course, you always have arousal in situations. You cannot avoid it 100%. And I think that also should not be the aim of infrastructural measures. But in general, we could, for example, see there that the situation improved. Other examples could be, as I also mentioned already, that you make the cyclist lanes a little bit broader, or also just changing the traffic light rhythm, giving cyclists longer period of time to cross a street or something. So these are all measures that are undertaken, and we could find some initial evidence that it works.
And just a little question according to this point, how do you know what the reason for the stress experience is? Like, do you ask the people?
Yes, that's a good point. The core of the ESSEM project is this measurement via the wearable, but we also always try to interpret those hotspots. So we ask participants. We had, for example, workshops, the people that participated in our study, and we looked together with them at those heat maps and asked them really like, what was the reason for this hotspot, or what do you think is the reason for this hotspot? In general, we try to interpret this, let's say, quantitative data and validate it also with the direct feedback of the participants. So that's something we always try because otherwise it wouldn't make sense. We cannot look into the brain of the people. We can try to find some evidence that allows us to understand how people feel, but in the end, it's always also about directly asking them and validating it.
Now, looking at the value the research gives the individual biker, what can change in the stress experience of individual based on the research?
In this regard, I think of the two streams I talked about. When we look at the first stream, this infrastructure side, I really think that cyclists can profit from our research because we give cities recommendations on how to improve the situation for cyclists. So this is the one side or field, I would say, where cyclists profit from. And then also looking at the product side a little bit more, some things you cannot change. I mean, sometimes a street is what it is. In cities, you have constraints based on finances or something. Maybe you cannot change a situation immediately. And then it's good to have products and services that still help you to navigate in cities on a bicycle or any other transport mode. So also there, I think by giving some recommendations for companies that offer safety products or solutions for cyclists, we also by that improve the situation for cyclists because we can improve products that help reduce stress or safety concerns.
Okay, so that means you're testing products by giving participants these products, and they are also taking test drives, and meanwhile, you are also measuring the stress moments, and then you can say if they enhance or decrease the stress experience.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I really love like the variety of what kind of under projects you are doing in this big project. So just to summarize it a little bit, what can be done in the future? Like we have interventions on a larger scale for cities and by changing the cycling infrastructure, so it becomes more safely.
Mhm.
And then we have the individual side. Individual cyclists can choose which ways they are driving on with this app or with this prototype. And then also what comes into my mind is the call for companies that they can also focus more on developing products for cyclists, because
Hmm.
I think there is a big focus on enhancing car experiences.
Hmm.
And I think there's room for more for doing
Yeah,
something
totally.
like an experience.
Yeah, totally. I think there is really room for more. And I would say, on the one hand, more data, because we did this in some, like, let's say, model region or model city. But I think we could even have more data, and having a broader database, we could expand it to other cities or try to cover the whole city area of the city of Osnabrück, for example, to have an even more comprehensive picture of the situation. So more data would always be good. And then also like more use cases. So on the one hand, the industry side, to have a bigger or a broader field of application in industry and new opportunities for products, for services. But then also like looking at research, it would be really cool to dive even deeper into this whole emotion sensing domain and try to test it in other research areas as well.
So now we have many theoretical and research insights. Maybe we can get a little more practical. And do you have any implications and any tips we can give our listeners today how they can be more safe and how they can feel better when cycling?
Yeah, I think that's a big issue, maybe even because for now, I feel people have to have courage to be able to cycle, or you have to have specific characteristics, a specific personality to be confident while cycling. And people that are not so confident maybe have higher safety concerns. So I would say maybe think a little bit of mindfulness to try to have more courage and also being a bit more empathetic. So there is also research that shows that the general climate in traffic and mobility is deteriorating. So people are a little bit more aggressive. There are more conflicts. They're feeling more stressed in general, not only in a specific situation as we measure it, but also in general, people are more stressed in traffic. And I think when everybody relaxes a little bit and thinks of the other and tries to also think of how the other person might feel in traffic would already help. So a bit more respect, a bit more empathy. I think that would be good.
So that means we still have to do a lot for now. But according to your research, do you think this topic around cycling is going to gain more awareness in the future by companies, by research institutes, so
Mhm.
that they can help improving the situation?
I think yes, because cycling gets even more relevant now, also with the e-bikes that also represent a new mobility form. Riding a e-bike is not the same as being on a bicycle without a battery. So also this changes how things work in traffic and also while cycling. But in general, it's a good thing. Like it's a good development that we have more cyclists on the road, also people with e-bikes, because this shows that the market grows, the interest in cycling grows, and this also underlines that also in research we need to keep up with that and even dive deeper into this and try to improve the situation step by step.
Cool. Yeah, we're excited to test the prototype when it's when it's there.
Yes, yes, you mean the routing
Yeah, exactly.
prototype. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So I think also this could really be cool. There are so many different use cases. We can think of reaching your workplace or school, university.
Nice.
And until there is the app the cyclist can use, maybe there's also takeaways that can be taken right now in choosing a route today by choosing paths that are more calm, that can be seen because they know those paths and
Yeah.
that are maybe well lit and that have a especially good traffic flow.
Yeah, yeah, totally. So you need to sometimes also try it. You need to get out of your house, get on the bicycle and just start cycling to have the experience and the knowledge where it's cool to drive and where not. So maybe that's also a key takeaway that people should not lose their confidence or motivation to cycle because of some problems, but to always keep in mind cycling is good. It's good for your health. It's cool. It's fun, and that you maintain this mindset.
These were very nice closing words, David. Thanks again for being here. We hope you had fun in this interview and we wish you a great time and a lot of success for the next upcoming projects. And to the listeners, thanks again for listening. Ride safely and please, guys, wear a helmet while cycling, even though you might find it unfashionable.
Thanks for listening to Sustainable Voices. Let your voice drive change. If you like this podcast, check out other episodes of Sustainable Voices. Goodbye.
Goodbye.